The summer of 1997 in Willow Creek, Arkansas, was unbearably hot, humid, and oppressive. It was the kind of weather where the sky felt heavy, portending something ominous, and even the birds seemed to fly lower than usual. The town, nestled amidst dense forests and forgotten backroads, had never experienced a storm quite like the one that struck on July 3rd, just a day before the Independence Day celebrations. That morning dawned as usual, serenely. The Sterling family farmhouse stood peacefully amidst the endless fields, its wooden windows open to let in gentle breezes, and crisp white curtains gently swayed. Inside, the 11-year-old triplets, Abigail, Bethany, and Clara, giggled carelessly as they finished their breakfast, their bare feet rhythmically tapping on the worn wooden floorboards. Their brother Lucas, who had just turned 16, was already outside, helping their father with chores in the barn. None of them could have imagined that this would be the last morning of their ordinary family life. Late in the afternoon, ominous clouds gathered over the ridge. The local radio issued a tornado warning, which was soon elevated to a severe storm warning. Willow Creek residents, accustomed to the whims of July weather, still sensed that this storm felt different. The air was thick with pre-storm electricity, and the clouds dropped to an alarmingly low level. Distant, muffled thunder rumbled, portending disaster. Margaret Sterling, the girl's mother, hurried them inside. Lucas helped his father secure the shutters, then rushed in himself as the wind gusts turned into a furious gale. By 5:47 p.m., the power went out. The family took shelter in their sturdy cellar, as they had done during previous storms. But this time, it proved fatally insufficient. The tornado that struck defenseless Willow Creek was later classified as an EF4. Its destructive winds exceeded 270 kilometers per hour, 168 miles per hour. Mighty trees snapped like fragile twigs. Roofs were ripped from homes like thin sheets of paper. The Sterling farmhouse shook to its foundations as the deadly vortex passed directly over it. The ground beneath their feet heaved. Desperate screams merged with the piercing howl of the wind, and then, in one terrifying moment, and deafening silence fell. When Lucas regained consciousness, he found himself buried under a pile of wooden debris and clumps of earth. A trickle of blood ran down his forehead. A piercing ringing filled his ears. Struggling out from under the cellar's rubble, he found his father unconscious but, thankfully, alive, and his mother bruised and inconsolably weeping. The triplets, however, were nowhere to be found. Absolutely no trace of them remained. No blood, no bodies, not even the slightest footprints. The following days descended into complete chaos. Neighbors immediately gathered, offering help. Rescue teams quickly arrived from the neighboring county. Helicopters continuously hovered over the ravaged landscape. Specially trained dogs were deployed. Volunteers thoroughly combed every corner of the endless fields and dense forests for miles around. The farmhouse, or what remained of it, became an impromptu headquarters, where hope and inconsolable grief mingled. However, nothing was found, not a tiny ribbon, a child's shoe, or even a scrap of clothing. Officials speculated that the powerful storm could have swept the girls away, perhaps into the river swollen by heavy rains. But the Sterling family adamantly refused to accept this theory. Bodies would surely have surfaced. Something should have been found, but there was nothing. This heart-wrenching story quickly made local headlines. Several reporters from the state capital, Little Rock, arrived to cover the tragedy. Headlines about the Willow Creek tragedy flashed across newspaper front pages and television screens for only a few days before the rest of the world moved on. But for the Sterling family, time stood still. Lucas, once a quiet and cheerful teenager, retreated into deep solitude. His parents, broken by the weight of unanswered questions, tried to stay afloat, but the absence of their daughters hollowed out their home from within, leaving a gaping void. Time marched relentlessly forward. School years faded into a silence filled only with the echo of unfulfilled hopes. Christmas came and went, leaving behind only empty stockings, a symbol of irreplaceable loss. Lucas graduated from high school and then left his hometown. He could no longer bear the oppressive silence that permeated every corner of his former life. The land was sold to cover medical bills and allow for a new chapter. The farmhouse, or what remained of it, was boarded up tightly, like a sealed tomb of the past. For most Willow Creek residents, the Triplet sisters became a tragic ghost story, something whispered to newcomers at the gas station or recounted by old-timers during summer thunderstorms, passing on a chilling legend by word of mouth. But Lucas never let go of the thought. It lived within him like an unhealing wound. By 2017, Lucas was 36 years old. He had moved 2 hours east of Willow Creek, working odd jobs and avoiding any attachments, as if fearing they might bring new pain. His parents had both passed away by then. His mother succumbed to cancer, and his father died of a heart attack 5 years later. The grief was never resolved. It continued to haunt him like a shadow. No proper funeral was held for the triplets, only a shared headstone in the Willow Creek Cemetery with their names and the sorrowful words, "Taken too soon, but not forgotten." Lucas visited the grave once a year, always leaving 3 lilies, but something inside him always resisted full closure, preventing him from moving on. Deep down, he felt that the girls hadn't died that night. Perhaps not all of them. He didn't know why he felt this way, only that the absence of evidence left a door ajar in his soul, a door he couldn't close, no matter how many years passed. In March 2020, after years of tormenting nightmares, he returned to Willow Creek. He didn't tell anyone about his arrival, wanting to remain unnoticed. The town had changed noticeably. New houses stood where wild forest once stretched. The road leading to the old farmhouse was barely recognizable. Weeds, rusted fences, and trees had reclaimed the land, erasing traces of the past. He had come to finally say goodbye to what remained of his former life. But what he discovered changed everything. Lucas parked his truck just before the property line. The driveway that once led to his family home was almost invisible beneath layers of thick overgrowth. Thorns and branches scraped the sides of the vehicle as he slowly drove forward, his heart pounding with every foot, sensing something. The house, or what remained of it, stood like a forgotten skeleton of the past, grim and silent. The roof had collapsed inward years ago, burying the remnants of its former grandeur. One wall had completely fallen, exposing what was once a cozy living room. Vines snaked across the floorboards and into the broken hearth, like living tendrils consuming the ruins. Lucas stood at the edge of the wreckage, hands in his pockets, the wind gently tugging at his coat, as if trying to comfort him. The place resembled a tomb more than a memory of a happy past. But he hadn't come to mourn. He had come because he needed one last look to finally find peace. He wandered the grounds where his home once stood for hours. The barn had almost completely vanished, dissolved into time. The cellar had collapsed, and the wooden door was now just a jagged hole leading into impenetrable darkness. The storm had erased so much, yet something still whispered through the destruction, faint outlines of places where the girls had played, the tree where they carved their initials, the spot where they buried their time capsule a year before the storm. Lucas stopped at the back edge of the property, where the fields once met the woods. He hadn't ventured this far in decades. Something pulled him there, like an invisible thread buried deep beneath his ribs. The ground was uneven and soft from recent rains. Trees creaked overhead, and birds scattered as he pushed through the dense undergrowth. Then he saw it. Something pale protruded from the mud near an old fence post. It was small, rounded, and half covered in earth. At first, he thought it was just a rock, but as he knelt and gently brushed away the dirt, the shape was unmistakable. It was a shoe, a child's shoe, caked with mud, fragile with age, yet remarkably intact. Pale blue canvas with a frayed strap and a faded daisy on the side. His breath hitched. He instantly recognized it. It belonged to Clara. The shoe made no sense. This area had been searched repeatedly for weeks after the storm. No one had found a trace. Yet here it was, not even fully buried. It seemed to have appeared recently, as if something or someone had moved it. Lucas sat in the mud for a long time, holding the shoe on his lap, his heart pounding in his chest like a trapped bird. The wind picked up again, now colder, heavier with something unexplainable, foreshadowing new discoveries. He returned the next day, armed with tools. If anything else was buried there, he was determined to find it. He dug carefully, methodically, starting from the exact spot where he had found the shoe. It didn't take long. A few feet down, the soil changed color, becoming looser, clearly disturbed. Lucas slowed his movements, his hands trembling, and sweat ran down his back despite the cool air. Soon, his shovel struck something solid. It wasn't a rock, but wood, a box. It was small, flat, with rusted hinges and a metal clasp. It took considerable effort to pull it out without completely breaking it. The box was no bigger than a shoebox. The lock crumbled easily under his fingers, yielding to time. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded pink cloth, lay various items. He slowly unwrapped the fabric. There was a locket, a tiny notebook, a friendship bracelet woven from colored threads, and a Polaroid photograph. The photo was faded but clear enough to distinguish faces. Abigail, Bethany, and Clara stood in front of the woods, smiling broadly. Behind them stood someone else, a man. His face was half in shadow, slightly turned away from the camera. Lucas stared at the photograph in complete disbelief. He knew this picture. It had been taken the morning of the storm, but this version had never been in the family albums. The man in the photo was not their father. He was no one Lucas recognized. Panic seized his chest, squeezing it in a vice-like grip. He looked at the back of the photograph. Faintly scrawled in pencil were the words, "Last game before we go," he promised. Lucas's hands trembled as he stared at the note. His mind reeled with impossible questions. Who was this man? What had he promised? Why was this box buried behind an old fence so far from the house? And why had it surfaced now, after so many years? The next morning, he reported his discovery to the sheriff's office. Willow Creek didn't have a large department, just a few officers and a part-time detective. They took the items, filed a detailed report, and promised to reopen the case. But Lucas saw the doubt in their eyes. Such old cold cases rarely yielded answers. Most people assumed that nature had claimed the girls, but now there was proof that someone else was involved in their disappearance. The case quickly garnered public attention. When the sheriff's office sent the locket and bracelet for examination, DNA analysis confirmed that the items indeed belonged to the Sterling sisters. The notebook, filled with short entries and drawings, matched Bethany Sterling's handwriting. But none of the items explained where they went or how the box ended up buried 2 decades later. Then something even stranger happened. A week after the news broke, an elderly farmer named Wade Perkins came forward. He lived on an adjacent property, about a mile through the woods that separated his land from the former Sterling property. He had worked that land since the 1960s, knew every inch of it, but had never spoken about what he saw that night. Until now. He told the sheriff about a truck, an old green pickup, that had been parked at the edge of the Sterling property on the night of the storm. He remembered it because it didn't belong to anyone local. He remembered it because in the chaos of that evening, with trees swaying and thunder shaking the sky, he saw a man leading 3 small figures into the truck. At the time, he thought it was just a family evacuating, but when he learned that the girls had vanished and were never found, he remained silent, thinking perhaps his eyes had deceived him. Lucas sat in the station, listening to the recording of Wade Perkins' testimony, his fists clenched. The man had seen them. Clara, Abigail, and Bethany were alive after the storm, and some man had taken them. This meant they weren't just lost. They were taken, hidden, or worse. Lucas couldn't sleep that night. He returned to the property and sat in the field where the shoe had been found, a flashlight in his hand. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The wind howled again, just like that night, as if echoing his inner turmoil. The air felt thick, full of ghosts of the past. Before midnight, his flashlight beam caught something among the bushes. It was a small wooden stake. Lucas walked towards it, his heart tightening with a premonition. The stake was old, weathered, but still stood upright, like some kind of marker. A second stake stood 10 feet behind it. Then another. A pattern emerged, a path. He followed them into the woods, each step sounding louder in his ears than the last, drowning out all other sounds. The stakes led him deeper than he had ever gone, past fallen trees and crumbling stone markers, as if an invisible hand guided him. Finally, the path ended in a clearing, a circular patch of ground surrounded by tall pine trees that seemed to guard the spot. In the center stood a small concrete slab, half overgrown with vines. Lucas knelt, pulling them aside. Beneath the earth lay a metal manhole cover. His breath caught. The hatch had no markings, no handle, just a narrow seam around the edge. It seemed it hadn't been opened in years, perhaps decades, but someone had built it, hidden it, and what lay beneath could hold the answers he had sought for 20 years. Lucas returned the next morning, armed with tools, a crowbar, gloves, a flashlight, and a growing fear in his chest that intensified with each step. The hatch seemed older than everything else on the property, as if it belonged to another era. However, it wasn't part of the house and wasn't marked on any of the original land plans Lucas found online. It seemed someone had intentionally hidden it where no one would think to look, away from prying eyes. He worked carefully, inserting the crowbar into the crack, prying and pulling. The rusted metal groaned in protest before finally yielding, opening a path to the unknown. A gust of cold air rushed out from below, damp and musty, like the breath of a long-forgotten past. A metal ladder descended into impenetrable darkness. He looked down into the opening, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand, reflecting his inner turmoil. The space below was narrow and silent, like a tomb. For a moment, he hesitated, gripped by doubt. Then he took a deep breath, steeling himself, and descended. The room was small, no bigger than a pantry. Concrete walls, a dirt floor, and one long wooden bench along the far side. The air was thick with dust and mold, creating an oppressive atmosphere. In the corner stood a rusty metal cabinet, partially open, as if someone had left the place in a hurry. On the floor, scattered and faded, lay toys, a plush rabbit, a plastic comb, a puzzle with missing pieces. Such toys that 8- or 9-year-olds might once have loved, filling this space with laughter and games. Lucas moved slowly, examining the room, his gaze stopping at a torn notebook near the cabinet. He carefully picked it up, as if afraid to damage the fragile pages. The first few pages were illegible, damaged by time and moisture, but in the middle, in childish handwriting, was a date. August 14th, 1998, more than a year after the storm. An entry read, "Abigail Sterling lost a tooth today." It continued, "Bethany Sterling cried because she thinks we'll never go home. Mr. A said, we're not ready yet. He keeps the door locked most of the day. It's cold at night." Lucas's knees buckled. He sat on the floor, his hands trembling, his eyes wide with horror, realizing the monstrousness of what had happened. The girls were alive, trapped in this eerie space. For how long? How many days, months, years? Subsequent pages became increasingly chaotic, reflecting despair and fear. Entries about food being brought once a day. The girls tracked time by scratching marks on the wall, like prisoners counting the days until their release. One entry mentioned someone named Mr. A. Another mentioned a song he hummed before entering the room, like an ominous lullaby. But the entries abruptly stopped in 1999. Without explanation, just a final page with a drawing. 3 little girls holding hands, standing under a cloud from which rain falls like tears. Below, written in shaky letters, were the words, "We are still here." Lucas emerged from the underground room pale and stunned, his mind refusing to accept what he had seen. He immediately called the sheriff. Forensic experts arrived within hours, promptly beginning their work. The space was meticulously photographed, cataloged, and sealed for further study. Tests would take weeks, perhaps months, but everyone already knew. The sisters had been taken, hidden less than a mile from their home, and kept alive, at least for some time. The question that followed was the hardest. Why? That same week, the sheriff's department pulled archived missing persons reports and cold cases, hoping to find some lead. They began checking everyone in the area in 1997 who had a criminal record or matched the description, trying to find any clue. A name surfaced that was unfamiliar to Lucas, Elmer Yeager. He lived less than 10 kilometers, 6 miles, from the Sterling farm in the 90s. He didn't have a direct criminal record then, but neighbors remembered him as a strange, quiet man, always watching, never speaking. He left in 2001, was arrested in Oklahoma in 2003 on unrelated charges, but released a few years later. No one had heard from him since. Lucas's stomach churned at the thought that this man could have been right under their noses all this time, hiding in plain sight. He went to the town library to review old microfilms, scanning every photo, every article that mentioned the name. That's when he found it. An old newspaper clipping from 1996. A photo of a July 4th church picnic. Kids on swings. Parents grilling barbecue. In the background, almost blurred, stood a man near the trees, watching. The grainy black and white image didn't offer much, but Lucas knew what he was looking at. It was the same man from the photo in the buried box. Elmer Yeager was there the day before the storm. He was nearby, watching, waiting, like a predator stalking its prey. An arrest warrant was issued within days, but Yeager had vanished. The address associated with his parole in Oklahoma was empty. His name had been changed in 2011, his digital footprint erased, as if he had never existed. Authorities suspected he had either died anonymously or was living somewhere far from Arkansas, off the grid, hiding from justice. The Willow Creek community was stunned. For years, they had mourned the triplets as victims of nature, swept away by tragedy. But now the truth was unraveling like an old, worn sweater, revealing something far darker and more sinister. After this, Lucas became a recluse. The press tried to contact him, but he refused all interviews, unwilling to share his pain with the world. What could he say? That he had walked that land hundreds of times and never thought to look beyond the trees? That he blamed the wind, the rain, the heavens, when all this time the fault was something far more human, something that could have been prevented? He kept the notebook, the original. The state wanted to keep it as evidence, but Lucas fought to keep it. To him, it wasn't evidence. It was a voice, proof that they had endured, survived, tried to send a message, and then one day he received a call that changed everything again, turning his world upside down. The sheriff's office received an anonymous letter. It was sent from Montana. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, exactly like the one from the box, but newer. Dated July 3, 2017, exactly 20 years after the storm. It showed a woman standing near what looked like a secluded cabin. Her face was partially turned, her hair in a braid. On the back of the photo was one phrase, "She still hums that song." They ran the photo through facial recognition databases. It didn't match anyone in state or federal records, but Lucas knew. He didn't need software to confirm what his heart was already screaming. It was Clara Sterling. Lucas stared at the photo long after the call ended. He turned it over and over, tracing the edges of the image as if the truth might seep from its corners. Clara Sterling, it had to be her. The braid, the shape of her eyes, even the faint scar near her temple from falling off her bike when they were 6. It was all there, undeniable proof. And yet, it made no sense. Why now? Why anonymously? And what did the message mean? She still hums that song, the same song mentioned in the diary entries, the one Mr. A hummed before opening the door. This haunted Lucas more than any face or photograph. That melody, meaningless to the world, had been burned into the memories of 3 girls for decades. Was she still trapped? Was she still under someone's control? Or was this message a signal, something only a brother could understand, a last hope for rescue? Law enforcement traced the photo's postmark to a small rural town in Flathead County, Montana, but there was no information about the sender, only the postmark and an ink smudge, as if someone had deliberately obscured their tracks. Lucas offered to fly there himself. The sheriff discouraged him, but didn't stop him, understanding his desperation. Within a week, Lucas was on a plane. The photo was carefully packed between 2 pages of his notebook, like a priceless treasure. He told no one, not even his closest friend from work. Part of him didn't believe he would return, or perhaps he just couldn't face another dead end in public, unwilling to relive the disappointment. Montana greeted him with snow and silence, as if immersed in an eternal sleep. Small towns dotted the landscape like forgotten time capsules, guarding their secrets. He rented a car and drove north on the highway, his eyes scanning every hill and curve of the terrain for something familiar. Although he had never been there before, the photo had no coordinates, no clear landmarks, only a cabin, a woman, and a blurred patch of forest in the background, making the search extremely difficult. He stopped at gas stations, diners, old post offices, quietly showing the photo. Most people politely shook their heads, not recognizing the image. Some didn't even look, turning away indifferently. It was in a battered fishing supply store on the edge of Glacier National Park that he got his first lead. An elderly woman behind the counter squinted, looking closely at the photo, then gently tapped it with a calloused finger. That cabin, it might be somewhere along the Elk Hollow Trail. There are only a few places there. Some people living off the grid keep to themselves, she murmured, as if sharing a secret. Lucas asked for directions. The woman hesitated before sketching a rough map on a torn napkin. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, then returned to arranging fishing lures as if nothing had happened. The road was difficult and grueling. Dirt roads narrowed to gravel, gravel to muddy, turning into impassable trails. Trees arched overhead like cathedral vaults, heavy with snow and silence, creating a sense of solitude. After almost an hour of slow ascent up the hills, he saw it. The cabin. It looked exactly like the photo, as if it had stepped right out of it. A sloping roof, a small window on the right, a chimney built of mismatched stones. No smoke rose from it now, no signs of life. He parked 100 meters away and approached on foot, his boots softly crunching on the frozen ground, breaking the silence. When he reached the porch, he stood motionless for a long time. No movement inside, no sound, just ringing silence. He knocked once. Silence. He knocked again, louder, hoping for a response. A flicker behind the curtain. His breath caught. The door opened an inch. Just enough for an eye to appear behind it. A single eye narrowed, cautious, blue, full of distrust. Lucas stepped forward and whispered the names. Abigail Sterling, Bethany Sterling, Clara Sterling. The eye blinked. The door slammed shut, as if an invisible wall had descended between them. He waited 5 minutes, then 10. He knocked quietly again. There was no answer. Eventually, he left a small note, tucked into the doorframe, folded tightly around the photograph. He wrote only one sentence: "I never stopped looking." And then he left, leaving only hope behind. He returned to town and waited. For 3 days, he stayed in a cheap motel by the highway, leaving his phone on the nightstand like a sacred object, waiting for a call. He barely ate, barely slept, his mind completely consumed by anticipation. On the 4th morning, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, no one was outside. But on the ground, neatly placed in the center of the doormat, was the photograph he had left at the cabin. And beneath it, a bracelet woven from pink, yellow, and green threads, just like the ones they used to make on the porch swing in the summer of '97. Lucas knelt on the cold concrete, picking up the bracelet as if it were made of glass, afraid to damage it. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the world, filling it only with that thumping. It wasn't just similar. It was the exact pattern Clara Sterling preferred. The same 3 colors, the same uneven knot where she had once run out of pink thread. Time had worn it, yes, but it was unmistakably recognizable. It was her bracelet. He looked down the empty second-floor hallway of the motel, hoping to see someone, anyone. But the courtyard below was quiet. Snowflakes softly swirled in the morning light, as if dancing in silence. Whoever delivered the bracelet had come and gone silently, like a ghost, leaving only a mystery behind. Lucas sank to his heels and looked at the photo again. The same cabin, the same shaded porch. His note was gone, replaced only by the bracelet. It was not an invitation. It was not a refusal. It was something else. An acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that his message had been received. That night, Lucas could not stay in the motel. He needed to go back, not to demand answers, not even to see her, but simply to leave something, a message, a sign that he was still there, that he hadn't given up. He drove back to the cabin after dark, with his headlights off, guided only by moonlight and the memory of what he had seen. The trees stood like silent witnesses, guarding their secrets. When he reached the porch, he placed a sealed envelope under the woodpile near the door. Inside was an old photograph of the 4 of them, Lucas and the girls, taken the summer before the storm. He had kept it for decades, creased at the corners, carrying it with him through every move, like a talisman. On the back, he wrote, "You are not alone. If you want me to stop, I will stop. If you want me to stay, leave the porch light on tomorrow." It was all he could offer, a last effort. The next night, he returned. The light was on, dim, flickering, but on. Lucas didn't approach the door. He didn't need to. He just sat in his car on the ridge above the property, watching from afar, letting that knowledge settle in his chest like warmth after years of frost. Clara Sterling, or someone, was still there, alive. But the next morning, the light was off again. And when he went back to the fishing store to ask a few quiet questions, the elderly woman behind the counter told him something he didn't expect. "That cabin?" she asked, frowning. "It's been empty since the fire. Burned halfway down 10 years ago. No one's lived there since." Lucas blinked, trying to process what he heard. "No," he said carefully. "I was just there 2 nights ago." She gave him a strange look. "Then I don't know what you saw, son, but that place has been absolutely silent for a decade." He immediately drove back, his heart pounding in his chest, sensing something was wrong. The cabin was there, as it always had been. But something had changed. The windows were boarded up. The roof had partially collapsed on one side. The door hung on its hinges, rotted at the bottom, as if long forgotten. The chimney was blackened with soot that stretched up to the broken sky, creating an eerie picture. Inside, the floor was warped and cold. Dust covered every surface. The furniture was scattered, burned, broken, as if a battle had taken place there. There were no signs of life, no photograph, no bracelet, no fire, no light, only ash and silence enveloping everything. He fell to his knees in the middle of the ruined living room, breathing heavily, trying to understand what was happening. Was he going crazy? Had he imagined the light, the bracelet, the photograph? But then he noticed something on the floor, a symbol drawn in. 3 small circles side by side. It was the same drawing Clara Sterling used to draw in her diaries as a child. It was their symbol, the Triplets symbol. Lucas recoiled, stunned. Someone had been here recently. Someone had drawn this, knowing he would understand that this message was meant specifically for him. This was not just an echo of grief and empty walls. This was real. Meanwhile, in Arkansas, news of the cabin photo and the bracelet reignited interest in the case, drawing public attention. The FBI joined the investigation. Behavioral analysts theorized that the girls, or at least one of them, had been taken out of state, kept alive, perhaps conditioned into silence, and hidden for years by a kidnapper who never intended to let them go. If Clara Sterling had escaped, she might have spent the rest of her life on the run, afraid of being found, afraid of what remembering would cost her. But none of this brought him closer to the truth. The trail went cold again. As quickly as the case reopened, the leads vanished. The cabin could not be definitively linked to anyone. No fingerprints, no DNA. The bracelet, even with all its emotional significance, was circumstantial evidence at best. And the note on the photo was handwritten, in block letters, untraceable. Nevertheless, Lucas held onto one conviction with absolute certainty. Clara Sterling had seen him, and she remembered. The following months were quiet, too quiet. Lucas returned home to Arkansas, but he was not the same person who had left. Every shadow outside his apartment window, every knock at the door, every flicker of light in the hallway made his heart seize with foreboding. He had seen something, felt something. And it wasn't that which haunted him. He was haunted by the silence afterward, that unbearable silence that pressed down on him. He tried to live a normal life. Went back to work, made small talk, took out the trash, folded laundry, as if trying to return to a familiar routine. But in the quiet moments, his thoughts returned to the woods, to the cabin, to the photograph, to the braid, to the bracelet in the snow, to those enigmatic signs. He couldn't stop seeing Clara Sterling's eye behind that door, and he couldn't forget the message. She still hums that song. It was impossible to ignore the weight of that phrase. It echoed in his dreams, repeated during thunderstorms, whispered to him through the hum of the refrigerator or radio static in the car. The song meant something. The song connected them to the man who took them. It was a clue, but he didn't know how to use it, how to decipher this code. So, he tried to remember everything. Every detail of the summer of '97. What songs played on the radio? What jingles came from the television? What did his sisters hum when they brushed their teeth, played in the yard, or rode their bikes? He rewatched home videos, trying to catch background melodies, hoping one of them would be the one. But it was all just noise until one evening, deep in an internet search, he found it. An early 1990s commercial, a regional ad for a children's puppet show that toured county fairs in the South. The jingle was childish and sickly sweet, but instantly recognizable. He played it again, then once more. He closed his eyes and could almost hear it beneath Clara Sterling's voice in those diary entries. She had recorded the phrase, "He hums it before he comes in." This was it, the song. He found the show's name, Mr. A's Carousel Show, and discovered it had toured Willow Creek in 1995. It was a small entertainment act, a one-man show with puppet characters and homemade sets. According to an archived county permit database, its operator was someone named Everett Yeager. Lucas's heart stopped. Yeager, but not Elmer. Everett. He double-checked the missing persons investigation. The man they were pursuing was listed as Elmer Yeager, but no middle name was documented. Lucas called his FBI contact, insisting they re-examine the case based on the assumption that Elmer and Everett were the same person. Within days, everything changed. A fingerprint match was found between an old permit form signed by Everett Yeager in 1995 and Elmer Yeager's parole records in Oklahoma. It was the same man. All of it had been hidden in plain sight by a simple name change, something anyone could do in the pre-digital age, remaining undetected. And more importantly, Mr. A's Carousel Show didn't just pass through Arkansas. It stopped in Louisiana, Oklahoma, even parts of Colorado. Each stop was accompanied by reports of missing children. Young girls vanished without a trace, barely mentioned in local newspapers before being forgotten, as if they had never existed. The connection was sickening, monstrous. Lucas sat in his apartment for a long time after the agent told him. The pieces of the puzzle fit together like teeth in a rusted trap. Clara Sterling was not alone. Yeager had done this before. Perhaps after, too. Perhaps always. The photo in the snow, the bracelet, the symbol in the ash. These were messages not just of survival, but of escape. Clara Sterling had escaped him. Perhaps not physically, perhaps not entirely, but mentally, emotionally. She had found a way to defy him, to reclaim her voice. And now she was using that voice in the only way she could, leaving clues, hoping someone would find them. Lucas went public with the story. He gave his first interview in April, meeting with a journalist from a national investigative publication. He didn't care about the attention. He cared about the reach. He wanted the story to be heard, so other victims could be found. He wanted it to reach whoever Clara Sterling had become, wherever she was hiding, so she would know her brother hadn't forgotten her. He wanted her to know she was no longer invisible, that people were watching, that her nightmare had been exposed, and it worked. Within weeks of the publication, new reports poured in. Testimonies, rumors, names, but none of them led to Clara Sterling. However, they led to another breakthrough, opening a new chapter in the investigation. A woman from northern Wyoming recognized the face of the man from an old puppet show flyer posted on the investigation website. She had seen him years ago, in 2007. He worked under an assumed name at a campground, fixing plumbing and sleeping in an old trailer out back, living a reclusive life. One night, he disappeared without warning, as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but clothes, tools, and a worn book of poems with the name E. Yeager scrawled on the inside cover. FBI agents tracked the trailer, which by then had been moved to a junkyard. In a locked toolbox beneath the frame, they discovered cassette tapes, dozens of them. Some were blank. Some had names written on them in childish handwriting. All of them were recordings of girls talking, singing, crying, and humming, as if their voices were trapped in time. Among them was one labeled C, third year. The recording was analyzed, digitized, confirmed. The voice belonged to Clara Sterling. Lucas listened to the recording alone in a soundproof room at the FBI field office in Little Rock. The agents offered to play it later, when he was ready, but he refused to wait. He needed to hear it now, needed to know. The recording began with static, then the mechanical click of an old tape recorder button. Silence followed, thick and heavy, as if portending something important. Then, the sound of breathing. Soft, broken, childish breathing. And then, finally, a voice. My name is Clara Sterling. I am 11 years old. Today is October 23rd, I think. Her voice trembled but was clear as crystal. Lucas felt his hands clench on the armrest of the chair, his breath caught in his lungs. She continued, Mr. Yeager said I could use the tape recorder if I promised to be good. So I'm being good. I'm saying my name like he said. There was a long pause. I don't know where my sisters are today. They weren't there when I woke up. He said they were being rechecked. I don't know what that means. Lucas closed his eyes. Tears burned behind his eyelids, but he didn't let them fall. He had to hear it, had to bear it with her, share her pain. The recording continued. She described the room, small, cold, windowless, like a prison cell. She mentioned the song again, how he hummed it while working, preparing food, pacing outside her door, like an ominous lullaby. She talked about counting the days, scratching marks on the wall until he made her stop. She spoke of dreams of the sky, of the feeling of running barefoot through tall grass, of the sound of her brother's laughter on summer nights, of those happy moments that had been stolen from her. I still hum that song too, she said softly. Not because I like it, but because it makes him think I'm still broken. Then there was a click. The recording ended. The agent stopped playback. Lucas sat motionless, stunned by what he had heard. There's more, the agent said gently. Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak, afraid his voice would crack. The next recording was shorter and darker. Clara Sterling barely spoke, only quietly hummed the same melody over and over, as if chanting. And then suddenly another voice, low, male, muffled as if from behind a door, spoke one phrase, sing louder so I know you're being good. Lucas lurched forward in his chair, clenching his fists. He recognized the cruelty in that tone, the casual power, the control this man had over his sister. The FBI confirmed what Lucas already knew. These recordings were real. Clara Sterling had survived beyond 1997, possibly into her teens, or even longer. It was unclear when the recording stopped. The last tape was labeled 2003. After that, there was nothing. No new labels, no new recordings, just a dead end. But this time, something was different. The investigation was no longer a cold case. It was officially reopened. The media picked up the story. The public reacted, demanding answers. And then, 6 months later, another letter arrived. This time, it came directly to the FBI office. No return address, just a soft envelope with a Utah postmark. Inside was a photograph of a woman sitting at a bus stop in winter. Her face was partially obscured by a scarf, but the scar near her temple was visible, like a mark of fate. In her hands, she clutched a small black cassette tape, and on the back of the photo, in neat block letters, was written, I'm not ready yet, but I'm listening. Lucas was called in again. He stared at the image in disbelief. Now there was no doubt. Clara Sterling had escaped, or been released, or gone into hiding in some way too complex to guess. But she was there, watching, deciding if it was finally safe to come home. Authorities couldn't find her. The bus stop was traced to a rural line in central Utah, but no one matching her description was found on cameras. She had vanished again, like a shadow in the wind, leaving only questions behind. The FBI speculated that she had taken the cassette tape with her for some reason, something symbolic, something she wasn't ready to give up, perhaps as a reminder of the past. Lucas felt hope blossom in his chest again, filling him with new strength. But with it came fear, because if Clara Sterling had been free all these years, why hadn't she returned? What kept her silent? What memories did she carry that made her believe staying hidden was safer than being found? The question echoed louder each day, giving him no peace. Lucas returned home again. This time, he told no one, deciding to act alone. He stopped responding to interview requests, declined book offers, ignored reporters who staked out his apartment. He didn't want to make a spectacle of his family's pain, to turn it into a public show. But he did something else. He bought the land. The old Sterling property, what was left of it, had been subdivided years ago, parceled out, and mostly left untouched. He made calls, sent letters, paid more than it was worth, and within 4 months, the land was his again. He cleared the overgrowth, rebuilt the old barn, not as it once was, but as a memorial, a symbol of remembrance. 3 white chairs on the front porch, facing west, each with the initials A, B, and C carved into the wood. He planted flowers beneath them. Wild daisies, Clara Sterling's favorite, and then he waited. He didn't know for what. He just felt he had to be there, that if she ever came home, there would be a place for her, a quiet place, a place without questions, cameras, or news reports, just family. And in that quiet waiting, the following years were both empty and full, filled with hope. The town eventually stopped whispering. The news cycle moved on, forgetting the old tragedy. But every July, on the anniversary of the storm, someone would leave something at the gate. A blue ribbon, a child's drawing, once a locket. No one ever saw who did it, but Lucas knew. Clara Sterling was still out there somewhere, alive. Almost 3 years had passed since the last envelope arrived. 3 years since the last photograph. 3 years of silence, of staring down long gravel driveways, watching the horizon for a movement that never came. Lucas no longer waited with desperation. That urgency had melted, transforming into something else. Patience, perhaps, resignation, but not hopelessness. That part never left him. Even after all the dead ends, the false leads, the silent seasons, he still believed. From time to time, he would return to the old diary pages Clara Sterling had once written. They were copies now, the originals held by investigators. He knew them by heart, but rereading them soothed him. It reminded him that his sisters hadn't just vanished. They had endured. Clara Sterling had found strength even in the darkness to fight. She had sent out pieces of herself, like breadcrumbs, like stars in the night sky, pointing the way. She wanted to be found, even if she wasn't ready. The wild flowers now grew tall around the barn. Lucas kept the grass short and the path clear, but he never touched the chairs, as if expecting them to be occupied at any moment. They remained as they were, weathered, silent, always facing west, as if waiting for something. And then, one autumn evening in 2020, the silence was broken. It was just past sunset when Lucas stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee in his hand, surveying the sky as he always did, looking out at the horizon. The first thing he noticed was a strange feeling in the air, still, yet heavy, portending something. The second thing he noticed was a light, a small, flickering flame by the gate. He froze. The gate stood about 200 yards from the house, beside the old gravel road. It hadn't been used in years. He squinted through the fading light. The flame was not a fire. It was a candle, and beside it, a figure. Someone was standing at the gate, as if waiting for him. Lucas slowly set down his mug, his heart pounding in his chest, drowning out all other sounds. He stepped off the porch and walked towards the figure, each step echoing across the quiet field, breaking the stillness. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. A woman, thin, wrapped in a dark coat, hooded, her head bowed. The candle sat on the fence post beside her, illuminating her silhouette. In her hand, she held something small and rectangular. She didn't move as he approached, like a statue. When he was 10 feet away, he stopped. Neither of them spoke, only the wind rustled in the grass. Then, slowly, the woman extended the item in her hand and carefully placed it on top of the fence. A cassette tape. She stepped back, giving him space. Lucas stepped forward. He looked at the cassette. It was labeled with 3 letters, A, B, C. He picked it up, his hands trembling with emotion. When he looked up again, the woman was walking away. Not quickly, not frantically, just walking away, disappearing into the twilight, as if dissolving into the air. "Clara Sterling," he whispered, her name a breath on his lips. She didn't stop, didn't turn around, but he heard something. As the wind picked up over the field, he heard it. Faint, but real. Humming. The same melody from years ago. The song she hated. The one she used to survive. Now it belonged to her, a symbol of her resilience. He stood there for a long time. After she vanished into the night, he didn't follow her. He knew better now. Clara Sterling had done what she needed to do. She had survived something unspeakable, something that would have broken many. And now she had returned, if only for a moment, to let him know, to deliver a final message. When he played the cassette later that night, alone in the quiet barn, it was mostly static. But after a minute, a voice broke through. Older, stronger, more confident. "I don't have to hide anymore. I just needed to see home again. You kept it safe. Thank you, Lucas." Then silence, then the humming. It was the last time he heard her voice. In the weeks following the cassette's arrival, Lucas barely left the farmhouse. He listened to the message again and again, trying to grasp every detail. He memorized every inflection in Clara Sterling's voice. The confidence behind it, the certainty. There was no fear left in her tone, no hesitation. She hadn't returned to ask for help. She had returned to say goodbye. Nevertheless, questions gnawed at him. The cassette was labeled with the initials of all three sisters, A, B, C. But only Clara Sterling spoke. There was no mention of Abigail Sterling, no mention of Bethany Sterling. He tried to believe they had made it out together, but something inside told him otherwise, causing him alarm. The FBI retrieved the cassette and re-verified the voice. It was Clara Sterling, and though she was older, her speech patterns matched those analyzed in earlier recordings. But that was all they could confirm. The recording offered no clues to her whereabouts, no new details about Everett Yeager, no mention of where she had been for the past 20 years until something changed. 2 months after receiving the last cassette, an anonymous package was delivered to the Willow Creek police station. Inside was a stack of documents, water damaged but mostly intact. At first glance, they seemed to be nothing more than property records. But tucked between the papers was a black and white photograph of a man's hand gripping a child's wrist. No faces, just the hand and the hand of a little girl. On the back, a phrase was written. He kept records. The handwriting matched Clara Sterling's. Federal investigators meticulously examined the documents. Most of them were logistical, supply purchases, fuel receipts, handwritten directions, as if someone was keeping meticulous accounts. But then they found something chilling. A ledger. Inside were names, dates, places, descriptions. Each page was a chronology, detailed records of movements and routines. Most entries seemed to be from the mid-90s to the early 2000s. It listed girls only by their first names, hair color, height, personality traits. The notes read like a user manual, as if they were not living people but objects. In the margins were references to corrections, re-education, punishment regimes, and on one of the first pages, A, B, C, acquired, July 3, 1997. Lucas couldn't breathe when he saw it. Abigail Sterling, Bethany Sterling, Clara Sterling. Next to each letter was a brief description. C, compliant, quiet, requires less control. B, willful, needs isolation. A, obedient, fearful, emotionally attached to C. He reread it again and again, hating every word that seemed to burn him from within. These were not observations. These were evaluations, written by someone who believed they had the right to go further than just abduction. Further in the ledger, the entries grew darker, foreshadowing terrible discoveries. Mentions of conditioning, failures, resistance, illness, and, ultimately, disposal. Next to one entry, under a date from December 1998, 2 lines were circled. B, gone. Buried behind the cabin. A, ceased to exist. Ashes. Location. 3. Lucas collapsed into a chair, his body feeling drained of strength. The truth had finally surfaced, revealing the full horror of what had happened. Bethany Sterling had died first. No explanation, no context, just gone. Abigail Sterling died later, ceased to exist, burned. Clara Sterling was the only one who survived. The man who took them had documented everything, not out of guilt, but out of control, as if their lives were experiments, temporary projects he could dispose of at will. It was inhumane, cold, and terrifyingly real. Authorities began excavations around the burned cabin in Montana. Deep in the woods, behind what remained of the structure, they discovered bones, small, carefully buried, some wrapped in decomposed fabric. Dental records confirmed what Lucas feared. Bethany Sterling had been found. A second excavation site yielded ash remains, charred bone fragments, and melted plastic, likely from a bracelet. Tests took time, but ultimately confirmed what was written in the records. Abigail Sterling had also died there. Only Clara Sterling survived, but even survival came at a cost, leaving an indelible mark. After the remains were found, Lucas returned to the site. He stood among the trees, looking at the place where his sisters had once been hidden from the world, as if in a dungeon. He thought of all the birthdays they had missed, of all the Christmases, of the laughter that had been stolen, of the childhood that had been erased, and he thought of Clara Sterling, standing alone in a storm of memories, bearing the full weight. He had always wondered why she hadn't come home. Now he understood. She hadn't just buried her sisters here. She had buried herself, a part of her soul. The funeral was quiet, under a gray sky and persistent rain, much like the day the sisters disappeared. But this time, the town gathered not in confusion or fear, but in grief, true grief, united in shared sorrow. For the first time in over 2 decades, Abigail Sterling and Bethany Sterling were laid to rest with names, with dignity, with voices returned to them through the fragments of truth left by Clara Sterling. Lucas did not speak at the service. He didn't need to. Everything that could be said was already known. Their story had become more than just a mystery. It had become a wound, finally exposed to the light. A wound that the community and Lucas himself had carried in silence for too long. He watched as the coffins were lowered into the ground. 2 small coffins side by side, white lilies resting on top. Between them stood a simple plaque with their full names and dates. And beneath those names, sisters, loved, remembered. But even as the earth closed over them, a part of the story remained unfinished, leaving room for a continuation. Clara Sterling, the girl who vanished, the woman who returned, the survivor who left more questions than answers. Lucas knew deep down that he might never see her again. Not in person, not with a certainty that could dispel all doubts. But that no longer mattered most. What mattered was that she lived, that she escaped, that she found her voice and used it not only to survive but to uncover a truth that had been hidden for so long. Months passed. The old house, once in ruins, began to take on a new form, as if rising from the ashes. Lucas used insurance money and donations from across the country, from strangers touched by the story, to rebuild it, not for living, but to preserve it as a sanctuary, a memorial, a quiet place for all who had ever been lost or forgotten. So their memory would live on. In one of the front rooms, he created a small archive. Clara Sterling's letters, Bethany Sterling's drawings, Abigail Sterling's photographs, copies of their belongings, the Polaroid from the box, the cassette tape, even the charred edge of the diary found in the cellar years ago. It wasn't about preserving pain. It was about remembrance and forgiveness, about letting go of the past but not forgetting it. One spring morning, Lucas opened the mailbox and found an envelope. No return address, like a message from another world. Inside was a single photograph. It was the same photograph Clara Sterling had left him years ago. The one where she stands by the cabin, her face partially turned, her braid over her shoulder. But in this version, there was something new. She was smiling. Truly smiling, her face illuminated by genuine joy. Behind her stretched an open field of wildflowers, mountains far on the horizon, creating a picture of serenity. No shadows, no fences, no fear, just freedom. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 6 words. I remember everything, but I'm okay. Lucas stood, holding the photograph to his chest, tears streaming down his face. Not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, closure, the peace he had sought for so long. That night, he walked to the gate and placed a candle on the fence post, just as she had once done. He didn't light it. He left that to her. If she ever returned, she would know the way, she would find her way home. And until then, her story, their story, would remain, not as a legend, not as a headline, but as a truth that no storm, no man, no silence could ever erase again. And under the watchful stars of Willow Creek, 3 white chairs faced west, creaking softly in the wind, waiting for the day when all 3 girls could finally come home, finding peace and freedom.